Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 216, and really what we're doing today is we're extending the concepts that we talked about last class a bit further. And the ultimate desire here is that sky is now going to be not computer generated. It's not going to be based on what Rhino comes up with or Vray comes up with as a sky. Instead, we're going to base it on an actual location with actual background imagery. And that can really help with the realism of any rendering. And so we will use HDRIs, which is what I'll talk about today, extensively for the rest of the semester as part of the rendering of your backgrounds. I have a bunch of HDRIs that have been set up for you with a bunch of settings already figured out. Today I'm going to walk you through how you would figure out the settings to begin with, because I think it's important that you understand the concepts of it. Moving forward, however, you can use the ones that I have as examples as your HDRIs using the settings that I've already gone through and created for you. So today is a learning process, but it's ultimately something that you don't necessarily need to really know. You can go back and watch the steps and if you really needed to figure it out for yourself. So on the course website, which of course I managed to close my browser, so I'll probably have to log in again. If you go into, I'm going to have to log in, so bear with me for just a second. If you go into resources, and there's a line item for Vray quick rendering setups. These quick rendering setups are essentially the backgrounds that I'm talking about, and you can see I have little previews of them, and you can see that the clouds in the sky look real in these. And essentially what they are, and I have the first three here are all daytime scenes. The next several are night scenes. We'll get to those. And the last grouping are all sunsets. So you can use those. And then I have one for a clay rendering, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the class. On any one of these, you can see that the HDRI background needs to come from somewhere. It's a special type of file that's designed to do this. This Dutch360hdr.com is a really great website. This guy who creates these, he actually goes out with a camera and shoots these. If you took 135 with me, you may remember we talked about high dynamic range images. These are essentially what he's creating. They're high dynamic range panoramas. So he's taken the images, he's stitched all of the images together, but they also have multiple exposures. And all of that is contained within this HDR file. And depending on the exact way it was created, it could be a .hdr. It also could be a .oxr or something like. There's a couple formats. But anyway, this guy at the Dutch 360s, he creates these for a living and sells them for a living. He very generously does donate some to those of us starving students out there. They're usually his lower quality versions. That's okay with me. And so you can go and download those. On the course website here, on some of these I do have direct downloads. Some of them I don't have the license to actually give you the direct download. So I'll tell you that you have to get it for free from his website. You can go there, you can sign in and get it for free, but you have to do it. Sometimes you have to actually buy it for free. So you say, it's a 0.00 euro purchase, but you have to go through and buy it to get it. Anyway, on all of these examples here, and some of them don't come from him. Some of them come from other locations as well. If you do Google search for HDRI background image, you can find a lot of these. The most valuable ones, and part of the reason that I like this Walter Grotius, his background images so much, is that they don't have a lot of conflicting objects. So some people will take an HDR background image and it has a bunch of stuff, like there's a building in the background. Well, that building then shows up in your rendering, which you don't want it to show up. So they can get a little bit nasty, and part of the reason his are so good is because they have almost nothing on the horizon. So it's clouds all the way down to the horizon, which makes them a lot more valuable. Anyway, for our purposes today, you can pick any one of these examples, or you can find your own. you're going to need the HDR image file. And you can download those from the quick rendering setups. I forget on today's exercise whether I have a link to one to begin with. So bear with me for just a second, and let's see what I put in there. Yep, I say to go to this page. So you'll go here and you'll download it. Like I said, I have several different ones, and you're more than welcome to use any of them. When you download the file, we'll let it go ahead and finish its download. We'll take a look at what's inside. I have to right-click and say Extract All so I can see what's inside of it. There we go. And so his files tend to come with lots of different things. The things that we're most interested in are these, what he calls the ENV file and what he calls the REF file. He also contains two files that are preview images. And if you were to open one of these, let's see if it'll let me open with Photoshop. Of course it won't. We'll open it this way. No. Why they set up Photos to open with Microsoft Paint, I don't understand. Bear with me so I can open this up in Photoshop. Okay, now we can make it big. So this is just the preview version of it. But what he does when he takes these is he's way out kind of on this boardwalk, and all the buildings and stuff are really, really close to the horizon. So if you have things in front, and if you were doing a blank desert with no objects, then you might see this stuff on the very edge of the horizon. But if you have any kind of normal set of objects in here, generally speaking, it will cover up that horizon line, and you won't see those in your rendering. Sometimes you have to get a little bit creative when you do the rendering as to the sky positioning. We'll talk about that as we get a little bit further forward. But you can see essentially this is a full 360 degrees. This edge, if it were to curl around behind me, would touch up and match up with this edge. Likewise, the sky goes all the way up to the very top as if it were inside of a sphere. That is the preview file. The two files that we're going to be using are the ref and the ENV. If we open them up in Photoshop, they will in all likelihood be far less attractive. So the image doesn't look as good here, and that's because it is a high dynamic range image. It has more information than can be displayed on the monitor with it. The other file, this ENV file, if it'll let me open it up here, is very much like the panorama, but it's blurred out. And what the ENV file is doing is it's providing the ambient light for your scene. Because in any scene, there's always some reflected light. So if we were looking out, I mean, today there's no clouds in the sky, so we would have the sun as our primary source, but we'd still get some reflected light off of the sky itself. If we were out on a cloudy day, we'd get reflected light off of the various clouds and shapes that are in the sky. And so that is approximated by this blurry image here. So we'll get to how these are applied in just a second, but I like to at least talk through what they are. So let's move back over into our exercise file, our San Francisco city file. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the city itself for right now. I can leave my building on for now. And now that I have that turned off, it's time to start bringing in these files such that I can use them. And so before I do it, I want to create a new layer, and I'm going to call that new layer, well actually I already created the environment layer, so I'll work underneath the environment layer. So I have the environment layer, I have the sun, which is on the environment layer, but we're going to end up modifying that in a little bit. I'm going to create another sublayer for the environment layer, and I'm going to call it a sphere. And on this sphere layer, which I'll make active, I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere. And I don't have to be particularly accurate in terms of where it goes. I'm also going to create a new layer and put an infinite plane on it. I'll call that IP. and I don't have my V-Ray toolbars up. The key command for it is viz infinite plane, but I'll go ahead and load the V-Ray tools at the same time. Let me go to toolbar layout, file, and then open. And I'll go to my flash drive, and there it is. And now I can actually just click the V-Ray infinite plane. This infinite plane, in all likelihood, shows up way far away from where my building is. It's not the end of the world. I can move my sphere over to be near it, like that. And you know what? I'm going to move that a little bit higher so we can see it in the side view. There it is. And we'll move it up. I didn't pay much attention to the size of the sphere because it really doesn't matter. So next thing I'll do, we can go ahead and turn off the building itself. And I'm going to work on this in the top view. So in the top view, if I were to look at this in shaded mode for just a second, I want the sphere to end up being a very reflective material. Essentially what we're creating is a mirror of the sky so that we can look down at the sky and see what's happening in the sky. You know, like those lawn ornaments that people have sometimes that are like the mirror balls that sit out? That's essentially what I'm creating for us. So I'm going to go into my V-Ray materials, and I'm going to load up Chrome as a material. So I'll go down to Load Material. I'll go to my flash drive, Resources, V-Ray, V-Ray Materials, and this is a metal. If I can find it, there it is. And there I have Chrome. We're not doing the blurry Chrome. We're not doing the matte Chrome. We're just doing the basic Chrome. So that's available for you guys to download. You can, if you have the material library, you can use it. And I will go ahead and apply that to my sphere layer because my infinite plane is on a different layer. We wouldn't want to apply Chrome to the infinite plane because then we'd have a really shiny mirror and looking down in it wouldn't help. So we'll leave the infinite plane as nothing, just the default material, but the sphere here, we're going to apply it. So either apply it directly to the sphere or apply it to the sphere layer, like that. If we were to look at it here, we can see that it's super shiny. That's how it should be. And so now it's time to actually load in that HDRI background image. So I'm going to go into my V-Ray options. So I'll click the O here. And previously we went into the environment and we clicked on the M for both the GI skylight and the reflection and refraction background. And we chose text sky. Instead of choosing text sky this time, we're going to change it to be text bitmap. Second option down. And then we'll go find that HDRI that we downloaded. Now I have under Resources and V-Ray, I have a whole V-Ray HDRI set of folders. I have my day HDRIs, and I can pick. I have more than are on the website. And so I can pick any one of those. I think it was Free 002 was the one that I had open earlier. Yep, there it is. And because this is the GI background, or the reference background, I'm going to pick the REF file. So this one, the non-blurry file. And I'll say Open. Once I have that loaded in, I need to make sure that I scroll all the way to the bottom here. And under the UVW section, I need the UVW type to not be channel. I need it to be environment. So this is reading as an environment. And once I've done that, I also want to confirm that the mapping type is set to spherical, which it is by default, so that's good. The horizontal and vertical rotation I can talk about a little bit later. You can choose to try to preview this. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it did work for me, so I'm seeing it. There are HDRIs that won't work. So I'll go ahead and say OK. And I'm going to move back up to the GI skylight, do the same thing. I'll click on the M. And I'll change from text sky back up to text bitmap. And I'm going to choose the ENV file, the blurry file for this. Remember, that's the global illumination or the reflected light. I'll scroll down to the bottom, and again, under UVW, I'm going to change from the general channel to the environment channel. And I'm going to make sure my mapping type is set to spherical, which it is. When I'm done, I can preview it. It doesn't give me a whole lot because it's the blurry version. I'll go ahead and say OK. And now I have both the GI skylight set and the reflection and refraction background set. I need to make sure that my camera is also set. My physical camera is turned on. It was from the previous render, so that's a good sign. And now I can move back to my top view and I can do a test render. So I'll go ahead and click on the R and do a test render. Looks like I have way too much space here. So let me go back to my V-Ray options. Let me go into my output. And I don't need it to be that weird skyscraper format anymore. We can just do a 480 by 640. And we'll do a render looking down on our object. So now that I've done this render, it's a little bit dark. So I could change my exposure just a little bit and to brighten it up. And I'll do that for the next one. I'm going to look at a couple things. One, I'm going to look at the reflection that's inside of my glass sphere, right here, or my chrome sphere. In that reflection, I can see where the sun is as I'm looking up at it. I can also see where the sun is casting a shadow from that sphere right here. So in this case, the sun, if it were in fact where it was supposed to be, would be casting a shadow over here. So the time of day that my sun is set for is not correct for the time of day that the image is suggesting. So I need to make one or the other match each other. So I have two options. I can choose to change the rotation of the HDRI such that the sun ends up over here and leave my time of day the same. Or I can change my time of day to match up with where the sun is. Either way works. And so I'll show you both methods just so that you have some familiarity here. So if I worked through the first method, I would need to change the rotation of the HDRI. So I'll come in here, I'll go to my V-Ray options, and since I'm here, I'm going to change that exposure on the camera so that it'll be a little brighter. And then I'll go into environment, and I'll go just do the reflection or refraction background color first. And I'll scroll down, and under my horizontal rotation, I need to adjust that rotation by a certain value. So I'm guessing it's about 270 from where I am. And I'll say OK. Now this is a guess and check sort of thing. So I'll go back and I'll re-render. And it looks like I was pretty accurate on guessing at 170. It's probably could be a little bit less, so maybe 240 instead of 270 might be a little bit better. So I'll go back and double check one more time. Here, we'll say, does 240 work a little bit better? Let's try 240. And again, this is going to vary. There's no scripted way of doing this. It's going to vary based on what HDRI background image you've picked. So it rotated a little bit further around. And that could come back just a little bit more if I'm being particular, though it's starting to get pretty darn close. So maybe instead of 240, it's more like 250. We'll say OK, and I'll do that render again. There you go. Now that looks pretty good. So the sun is in the correct position for the shadow. So what I did is I took the background image and I rotated that around to match up with where the sun was in my scene. The other thing that can play a little bit of an effect on this is how high the sun is in the sky. This is much harder to judge. So depending on the height of the sun in the sky, you may want your shadow to be more or less long. That's more of an arbitrary decision that's based on you. Now, if you took your own HDRI at a particular site, you would know exactly where it was and what time of day it was shot, etc. You'd have all that information, so it would be easy to put it in. For our purposes, we don't know when this image was shot, so we have to make it up. So the other option, oh, by the way, once I'm done here, I'd go back to my options and I'd change the GI skylight to match. So this would need to also change to 250 right here. So my background image or my background ambient illumination would also match. So those both need to be the same. The other option to this, so I'm going to go back and reset these to 0. Would be to look at the original and say, I need to change my sun time of day to match so that the shadow is going over here. So right now I have the sun, I believe, in the morning. So this would need the sun to be in the afternoon. So I'd go back to selecting my sun. So it's on its own layer. So I can right-click on sun. I could say select objects. Oops, let me deselect everything. Right-click on sun, say select objects. One directional light added to selection. Perfect. I'll go to my properties. I'll go to my light properties, and I'll click on modify sun. I'll uncheck manual control, and I'll come back here. This needs to be San Francisco again. And like I said, this is probably more in the afternoon. And notice that the way I have this set up in the top view looking down on it, there's my compass. And as I adjust this, I can kind of guess about where that sun was positioned based on the time of day. The time of year would change how high or low the sun is in the sky. So you can see here that I'm changing the height in the sky. So if I have an idea of how high that sun is in the sky, I can change the time of year to try to match that part and change the rotation based on the time of day to match. And maybe that's a little bit high, so maybe this needs to go down just a little bit. But you guys get the idea here of how I'm making these adjustments. It's a little bit, yeah, it's about right there. Now that I have those two things set up, I can say OK, and that's going to modify the sun to match the background image. I'll do a test render to see if I got it correct. Yeah, that feels pretty good. Where the sun is on this side and it's casting a shorter shadow because it's a little bit higher in the sky. So that feels pretty good as a way of modifying the background. So you're either matching the sun to the background or the background to the sun, one or the other. So if we flip back over to my basic day scenes, we have a variety of pieces of information that I've already set up for you. And so in this basic day scene 1, I have the HDRI file, and then I have what I believe to be the correct sun settings. So in this case, it would be San Francisco on this date at this time with daylight savings turned on. So I've given you the cheater information. For your purposes today, don't just go and do this. Actually create the spheres and figure it out on your own because it'll help you. Because you're not going to want to be limited to just 3 scenes for the rest of your life in terms of your backgrounds. You're going to want to go find other HDRI backgrounds and be able to use those. And so you can pick any one of these. The other key to it is also what the camera settings are. So what the shutter speed should be. And you can see that that changes. So this first one, day scene 1, I have the shutter speed set to 200 with the physical camera on. This day scene 2, I have the shutter speed set to 400 with the cameras turned on. So these are what I believe to be the approximate correct settings for these various backgrounds. I've made your life a little bit easier, and again, you're not doing this today, but you can do this long term, and that is that down here at the very bottom is something called a VisOpt. You can download this file. Don't click on it, because if you click on it, it'll show up like this and be a bunch of XML code. Instead, right-click and save this link as. This VisOpt file here will preload all of these settings for you. You'll still have to create the sun and make it match the correct time, but it'll preload the shutter speed and the physical camera and all of the other settings for you. So that can be useful in terms of helping you out just a little bit. OK, we'll come back to this refraction background set to 6.0. So at this point, I'm relatively happy that I got my time of day set. Now we can move back. I can turn off under layers. I can turn off my sun. I can turn off my sphere, and I can turn off my infinite plane, like that. I'm going to switch back in to my perspective view, and I'll turn back on my skyscraper and my SF city model. I might also go back to my set view, and we'll do perspective 2 to get back in here. I may also, I'm going to do a quick pan so we can see more. Sorry, my sun should have been on. There we go. Let me just zoom out. I'm not overly worried about seeing my building. I want to see the sky so I can kind of see how the settings are set up. And I'll go ahead and do a test render. Again, I'll go into my Vray options, and in output, I want it to be relatively small because I don't want this to take forever. You may also find that now's an appropriate time to turn on your distributed rendering, and we'll go back through that in just a second. For right now, it's a small render, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, and I'll go ahead and click on the render button. And so it's going to start the rendering for me. Now, right now, the sky background, unless it's a really stormy day, is looking far too dark for the overall rendering. And you can even see that already in the preview. So I need to be able to modify that color. I need to be able to lighten the HDRI. And this is where HDRIs are so valuable. Remember, just like a high dynamic range image, when you capture it, you're taking multiple exposures. So I can shift how light the overall image is based on V-Ray settings. So I'll go into my V-Ray options. I'll go into my environment again. I'll click on the M next to reflection and refraction background. Sorry, I don't even need to go that far. There's a value given right here under this reflection refraction background. The higher this number, the lighter the background becomes. The lower the number, the darker the background becomes. So I could take this background, and I suggested on the sheet that it was 6, but I could take it up to, say, 10, for example. And when I go back and re-render, you will see that this background suddenly becomes much, much lighter. And you can see it there already. So now it's a matter of finding the correct balance of settings. And you may have to let the rendering go all the way through and finish so you can kind of see the general color and look of that background image. So I suggested that that be at 6, so we'll give it a shot at 6.0. And then I'll go ahead and render this one again. And we'll let that go. So for today, I'm going to encourage you to work with the day scenes. Stay away from the night scenes. We'll get to those, I promise. We'll get to night scenes, but we're not ready for that. If you really want to take something else on, you can work through the sunset scenes. It's important, though, that some of the suns actually exist. So in this case, the sun is set at 7:30 p.m. with daylight savings time turned on that date. Some of these suns, however, your sun should be turned off for the rendering because the sun's actually below the horizon. It's already gone down in this particular rendering. So I would stay away from those. Stay with the ones where the sun is actually still there. It's just going to be very low in the sky. In all reality, using the day scenes are your best bet for today. But I wanted to introduce you to this concept to begin with. So your job today is to pick one of these HDRIs and reverse engineer the time of day from the HDRI. And I really want you to do it. Don't just trust what mine is, because if you learn it now, when you find another HDRI, you'll know how to do it. And that's the important part. So you'll go through, spend some time assigning materials, and get your final rendering ready to render. I suggest a couple other things that you can do as part of your rendering. There we go. I can see this starting to come through. The sky is starting to match up nicely with the color of the scene. There, through those two buildings, is an example of some of the ground showing up from the horizon line. And so once I sink myself down in between to a street level perspective, I'm not going to see that anymore. All I'm going to see are the clouds up above. And so that's a good thing. If there was a big building or a flagpole or something here, then I would see it up above, and that wouldn't be less than ideal. One of the example files that I have for you is this one, the Malibu Overlook. In this example, it's great because assuming you're on the west coast of the United States, the west of this scene is ocean. So you can do a rendering that's on the edge of the ocean and see the ocean essentially. The bad news is it's very much a cliff on the other half of the rendering. And so you'll see the cliff in the rendering if you look the other direction. So you have to be kind of careful with that one in terms of the orientation when you do the renderings. So what I want you to do is to create a good rendering for today and post that rendering. If you have extra time, now would be a great time to start working on your assignment 203, assuming, of course, that you've finished your assignment 202 and are ready to cut it out or glue it together. I am going to go see if I can get cardboard and see if I can do a set of test cuts such that I can show you guys that today. That's my goal. I can't promise you that all of that will work, but fingers crossed I can do that as a sample. If it doesn't work, you can of course watch the video that I recorded a couple years ago because the method of putting it together hasn't changed. It's still the same. But I like to do it live for those of you that want to see it, because then you can ask me questions as we go. So today I want that render. If you finish early, work on 202 if it's not done, and or work on 203. Next class, when you come in for exercise 217, we're going to talk about unrolling the surfaces such that we can fold the model up and make the actual skyscraper. And we'll also talk about making watertight objects, being able to 3D print those objects. How do you generate the G-code such you could walk over and actually do the 3D print? So that's where we're coming next class. Are there any questions before I turn you loose? No? Okay. I'll let you guys go.